Hello and welcome. My name is Andy Solkeld and this is my UKTC mission pack review. Today we are talking about mission 33, which is Secure Mission Artifacts, and this is going to be round 5 of a GT. A lot of GTs in the UK are 5-round events, so this will be your last round. The missions that follow this will be if there is a 6th round or a day 3. So this is potentially the last mission you will play at a GT tournament. And as you will see from the image, it is quite a complicated one. Because in this mission, you move 4 of the objectives. This is a hold 1, hold 2, hold more. And at the end of each player's turn, they score 3 victory points if they control their priority target. Which is nominated by their opponent at the start of the mission. So, before deployment begins, you move 4 objective markers that are not in the centre of the battlefield up to 6 inches in a pattern A1, B1, B2, A2. So, I would move one first on one half of the board. My opponent would then move 2 objectives. The one remaining on the half of the board I chose, and then one of the 2 on their half of the board. And then I would move the last objective that has not yet been moved. You cannot move one that has already been moved. And then after you've done that, each player secretly decides the opponent's priority target from one of the 2 on their half of the board. The tempo of this game is entirely determined by who moves that first objective. And what I've tried to do in the map is you will see you'll see 2 potential layouts, which is basically if I move first or if my opponent moves first. And what I've assumed in this is if I move first, as a Sisters player, I want to play the most defensive game possible. If my opponent moves first, they do not want me to play a defensive game, and therefore it will be more aggressive. And I'm going to talk through that in a bit, but I just want to mention this last point because it's very important. It's very important because it dictates the entire pace of the game. You can score 45 primary, the maximum primary, by only holding 2 objectives and your priority target for the 5 turns of the game. You'll score 4 lots of 8, just hold 1, hold 2, which is 32, plus 15, so holding your priority target 3 times 5, which scores you 47, which caps at 45. And what that means is you never, ever, ever have to walk into the middle if you can hold 2 objectives safely, and then just hold your priority, which will also double up with your shrine as a Sisters player. And so that little quirk, you wouldn't necessarily normally think about it, but what it means is this is a very passive game. It will come down to who has stronger secondaries. I've made mistakes where I've miscalculated what my secondaries can cap out and what my opponents can, and have lost. Even though we both scored the maximum possible, I lost because of they capped at 98, mine capped at 97, and therefore I lost. And it's little things like that if you don't know that sort of quirk about this mission, you can play it as you would play a normal 5 objective like this, whereas actually you don't need to. So what we're going to talk about to begin with is moving the objectives. And this is incredibly important for Sisters because of Defend the Shrine. To Defend the Shrine requires you choosing an objective that is not within your deployment zone. So even though you can move the objective to your top left, so north of your deployment, into your deployment zone, because you can move it 6 inches, you do not want to. You want to make sure it is still outside your deployment zone. But I don't think you can move your bottom one outside of your deployment zone for the purpose of then nominating that as a shrine. I believe those two distances don't allow it. But what it does mean is if you move that, if you get to move first, and I would highly recommend any Sisters player pick to move the first objective, move the top objective so that you can hold it from behind your top ruin. And then that your opponent will not nominate that as your priority target. Unlikely. They may do. But you can then nominate that as your shrine and hold it safely from behind the wall. You can't screen out that top bit from deep strikes if you're just holding it from that corner. So you do need to be aware of potentially putting something else up there, like a Rhino or a Castigator or something like that, if you are worried about deep striking onto your shrine target. So what I've kind of done here is we're going to now look at the yellow objective markers. So I'm the Sisters player. I have chosen to move that yellow objective marker safely. So the default for my opponent is to move my home objective, the one they have to choose, and to move it into the open. And it is possible to place that objective so that it cannot be held from either of the ruins nearby. So they will do that. And that will likely be nominated as my priority target because it can't be held from cover, and therefore they can shoot it off, assault it, whatever. They will then either move one of their two objectives back into safety. So that's very likely going to be mirroring what I did with the shrine target at the top, and then I will mirror what they did with their first move at the bottom. The key thing with all of these movements is because you need to hold two and nothing else, and potentially assault the middle if your opponent is going to go there, you want to make your triangle between your two objectives in the middle as small as possible, and you want to make their triangles as big as possible so that they have to spread out. And this is particularly bad for small footprint armies. So I've now also done a green set of markers, which is if my opponent moves my objective first. So my opponent moves what was going to be my shrine out into the open, can't hold it from any cover, can't do anything to protect it. So what do you do in this instance? Well, in this instance, I would typically move my home objective, the one I have to move, right into the up into the kind of medium L ruin, so that I can hold it from there. And because it brings those two objective markers as close as possible to each other. I would then try to move their objective marker to mirror their first one, or to mirror what they did to my objectives, so then that's in the open. And then they would likely do the same. They might move what they do with their home ruin. It's kind of up to them. The closer they move it to my objective that they moved, so top left, that would create a neat triangle for that. And you can see what I've done with the green dotted lines is I've basically shown the way to hold for minimizing the triangle sizes, just to how you can kind of visualize the triangles that you're going to need to hold. If they move your objectives like this, I highly recommend not taking shrine, because you are, or to shrine the middle objective, because they are clearly going to nominate the top one as your priority target. So what you need to do is you need to basically be prepared to feed stuff onto it, which means you have to be feeding out of your ruins onto that objective. It can work, but then when you get to deployment, you need to set up your OBSEC Dogmata to then be able to advance just random nonsense units onto it. You need to be moving Zephyrim and Repentia into the middle that can stage to assault it. There's a lot of kind of nightmare scenarios if they move that objective first, and you just need to be prepared for it. These are just examples. These objectives can go anywhere, and you just need to be prepared for where they could go, etc., and how to play. As a Sisters player, if I get to move them, I will 100% try to set up the passive. I'm going to just sit back, hold to the entire game, score, and try to win on my secondaries that cap at 97, where I'm very likely to take, say, maybe not 97, but Defend the Shrine, Leap of Faith, Banners, scores 10 on it. As long as I can kind of match my opponent's secondaries, it's fine. But that quirk means you kind of have to plan this in advance and be aware of them. As with the other diagonal deployment, you start 24.8 inches away on this one. Therefore, you can't do turn 1 charges unless they are line to line, advance and charge Repentia that have been given an additional sacred rite. So, how does it come down to playing it? Obviously, it is very challenging, and most of the game is played based on the way the objectives move. So that will entirely frame your game. If you end up with green-looking objectives, it will be incredibly bloody. You will be assaulting, things will be dying, but you just need to outscore your opponent, and that's the key to it all. Couple of quirks that you need to be aware of. If your opponent moves your home objective to where they were, to what I've suggested as yellow, so bottom left yellow, you can hold that with a character that is being granted Lookout Sir from a unit or a vehicle or something that is behind the obscuring ruin. And because that unit is very likely to be closer, or say you have a small Zephyrim unit where they're marked in the very bottom ruin, what that means is that character can just stand in the open, can't get shot because of Lookout Sir, and can therefore just keep holding that. Particularly as Sisters, because if somehow they do get around that, you can then just 2CP Divine Intervention and stand up, and you still score it. There are two pretty good staging areas marked out in blue, which basically allow you to assault your opponent's spaces. And I've marked out traditional movement lines that typically go for Zephyrim, Repentia, etc. I've also marked out late game. I typically start my Retributors at the back, but depending on how the objectives move, I might want to start them further forward where I've currently marked other. You could put your Retributors in there to then enable them to walk out and have the straight firing line across. Given how busy this slide is with the objectives, I didn't want to put in firing lines, but there are two very straight firing lines between the objectives at the top, and having your multi-melters just point along there is absolutely devastating. So again, just be aware of that as an option. You don't have to follow the way I've set things up here. But yeah, I would typically allow myself to hold my objective with a character being granted Lookout Sir, and then worry about kind of obsec missiling onto my what could very well end up being my shrine. With regard, so this is like, it's really hard to say much more without knowing the way the objectives move for you. But largely just be prepared to play a very tight game. Because you can potentially outscore your opponent, you're going to cap primary just by holding 2, which is very unlikely given the objective in the open. If that is the case, then you need to be trying to match your opponent on primary, so make sure if you're forced to only score 4, make sure you're giving them 4s as well. and just try to trade into them to make that happen. But if it's not like that, it's a very passive game and you just need to be patient. It's very boring, but just being patient will win you this game 9 times out of 10 if you get the yellow setup of objective markers. If I set up yellow, I would take Defend the Shrine, Leap of Faith, and Banners. I might take R&D if I thought my opponent could assault banners off me. I really wouldn't like to take a kill secondary on this, unless we were playing on green objectives, in which case I know I am going to be killing my opponent as much as possible. So just some things to think about with regards to this. Again, it's a mission where you never have to go in the middle unless you want to. And on these sorts of missions, I think going into the middle is a trap and I wouldn't recommend it. But anyway, that would be this is the end of mission 5. So this would be where many GTs finish. I will be carrying on with the remaining 4 missions to just talk through them in case you end up playing them casually or you make it to a final, etc. So I look forward to speaking to you then. Thank you.